Hello, this is marking guidance for the fourth core skills assignment. For the next few minutes, what we'll do is we'll go over a bit of the administration details, then we'll talk about the marking overview in general terms, and then we'll talk specifically about what is required for this fourth assignment, which is a case report. First of all, it's really important that not only do you have an email address which is either a UCL one, a KCL one, or an Anna Freud one, it's also important that you check these email accounts because that's where we will be sending the assignment scripts for you to mark. Now, assuming we have sent the assignments on Friday the 2nd of November, then we really do need the mark sheets back by 9 o'clock on Wednesday the 14th of November. We've already extended that for as long as we can afford to, because we then need to go through the whole second marking process, and that sometimes includes extending the sample that we second mark. I will explain that in a moment. And we then need to get the agreed marks back to the students within a time frame that is stipulated by the colleges. Now, if you think that is in any way going to be problematic for you, then please do let us know as soon as you can. The clients used for this fourth core skills assignment need to be different to the clients used in all of the previous core skills assignments. Each of the other modules have different rules relating to whether any clients can be reused for assignments across different modules. But from our point of view, for core skills assignments, each of the assignments must be focusing on different clients. We do a process of second marking or check marking or double marking. It has different names at different times in different colleges. And we will be doing this as a core skills team under the guidance of the new module lead, which is now Dr. Russell Hearn. But as you start to mark the assignments, please feel free to discuss with the other markers or with us if you want any guidance to make sure you're in the right sort of ballpark. And we would see this as calibration. This is a way to ensure that we are all marking in roughly the same sort of way. When it comes to the formal second marking, we have very clear criteria about what we have to double mark, and this is a combination of the rules from both of the colleges. So we will always second mark all of the fails. We will take some mid-class examples from each class. We will look at those that fall just below the borderlines, so 59s and 69s we automatically double mark, and overall we need to do at least 10%. And the way that we've chosen to do the double marking is it's really check marking. So the second marker will know the initial mark, and we're just checking that it's about right. And if there's agreement, then the marks are provisionally agreed and subject to formal exam board approval. They're submitted to the course administrator and issued to the students. If there's disagreement, then we will automatically extend the sample. What we mean by that is we will look at some other pieces of coursework marked by the same marker to see whether we think they've been particularly harsh or particularly generous overall, and then we'll decide what's going to be best to do, and we'll do that in negotiation, of course, with the first marker. There are some penalties for late submissions. This is really just for your information in case any of your students ask you about this, but it's nothing for you to worry about because we will be dealing with this. So we will make any adjustments necessary if the submissions have been late. But these are the details of those reductions, which depend on how late and what the mark would be if it had been handed in on time. Now, we don't expect you to check the total word count of all the assignments. If you suspect that the word count of the main body is over the word limit, then please simply draw that to our attention when you return your mark, and we'll check it and apply any penalties to the mark that you give. But remember that if the word count of the tables, charts, boxes, etc. seems high, then just be aware that you should ignore any words in the tables, charts and boxes, etc. that are above 15% of the assignment word limit. So in this case, we're looking at anything over 600 words in the tables, charts, boxes, etc. should be ignored. This short presentation will clarify the situation concerning assignment word limits within CYP IAPT assignments. Every assignment will have a word limit which is specified in the handbook. That word limit refers to the maximum number of words allowed in the main text of your assignment. If your main text exceeds the stated word limit, your mark will be affected. If your word count exceeds the word limit by less than 10%, then your mark will automatically be reduced by 5 marks. If your word count exceeds the word limit by 10% or more, then your mark will automatically be reduced by 10 marks. These deductions will be made even if this means reducing the category of pass, but any deductions will not lead to the assignment failing if it would have passed before the deduction was made. So for example, if you would have scored 52 but you've exceeded the word limit, then your mark will be reduced, but only reduced to 50. Now let's try and clarify exactly what is and is not included in the main text word count. So your main text word count does include headings and subheadings, but not headings and subheadings in the appendices, reference lists, bibliographies, tables, graphs, or diagrams. Any citations within the text are included. So for example, Fugel, Dunsmuir and Curry 1999 will count as 5 words. The main text does not include the words included in the appendices, the reference lists or bibliographies, tables, graphs, diagrams, footnotes, headers, footers, and the bit right at the beginning that says the word count is whatever it is. Now, all discussion and commentary should be presented in the main text and not squirreled away in the footnotes or appendices. So although all the words and numbers presented in tables, graphs, diagrams and footnotes, etc. do not count towards the main text, they do count towards a supplemental word count. And that supplemental word count must not exceed 15% of the stated word limit for that assignment. Anything beyond that 15% will simply not be marked. Now let's try and make this really clear about what is and is not included in the word count. So here, this is the header on each page, and this does not count towards your word count. This is the word count at the beginning of your assignment, and this does not count towards your word count. Here, highlighted in green, are headings and subheadings within the main text. These do count towards your word count. Down here you can see a footnote. This counts towards the supplemental word count, but not the main text word count. Down here where it just says page 1 and page 2, this is the footer, and this does not count. This is a diagram. It and its heading count towards the supplemental word count. Now working our way through this assignment, here we see a table. It and its heading count towards the supplemental word count. Here you'll see a citation. This, as we said earlier, does count towards the main text word count. This is a graph. It and its heading count towards the supplemental word count. This here is the reference list. It and its heading do not count. This is an appendix. It does not count. So hopefully that's made everything super clear, but if you have any questions, please do ask, and preferably do that before you submit your work. Thanks very much. So now moving on to the marking in general, we have categories, percentages, and grades. And this chart just very neatly shows all of those next to each other. And here is the same chart with a bit more detail specific to the case reports. You should have a copy of this sent to you when you're sent the scripts for marking. And we've tried hard here to be very clear about what sort of quality of assignment falls into the different marks. The most difficult one both to define but also to mark are those that are on the borderline between pass and merit, and those are ones that we're very happy to discuss prior to you submitting your final marks if we want to calibrate them. Remember, the mark sheet has some basic information about the student number and the course. Then it has an overall mark, so the final mark, which is from 0 to 100. And then for each of the different aspects of the assignment, we want you to show us the category by which we mean, is it a distinction, a merit, a pass, or a fail for each of those different aspects of the assignment. And then there's also a section for strengths and areas for development. Now remember, when you come to mark, this is not about your personal opinion and whether you liked it or not. This is about how the assignment stands up in comparison to the marking criteria. So whether you think a plank of wood is very short, short, long, or very long depends a lot on where you're standing, on your previous experience of planks of wood and what you consider to be long or short. But if you had criteria that said 0 to 30 centimetres is very short, 31 to 60 centimetres is short, etc., then actually all you have to do then is measure the plank of wood. And as much as possible, when marking these assignments, we're looking for you just to measure them using the marking criteria. And obviously it's not quite as simple as that, but we're trying to make this process as objective and as fair as possible. Essentially, the given mark needs to be explainable and defensible. Written feedback, which is very brief, may not actually be safer, because the more the student understands your rationale for your final mark, the less likely they are to feel aggrieved. And we would encourage you to make the comments objective, evidenced, and grounded in the criteria. So for example, it felt that you're confused about the evidence base expresses your feeling and is not evidence-based. Whereas there were inconsistencies in the way in which the evidence base was reported, and this did not demonstrate a thorough knowledge and understanding. That's a statement about what they submitted and how it compares to the marking criteria. So now onto the specifics of the evidence-based practice case report. We have stipulated in the handbook that the work must have been going on for at least 6 sessions. And it's worth saying that all of this information and the information on the following slides is adapted very slightly from the handbook. So these are not surprises to the students. I'm not going to read through all of these bullet points, but I've really tried to provide a digest of the description in the handbook. And if in doubt, if you want a bit more information, then please do refer to the handbook. You'll notice here that it stipulates the report must include some measures of assessment at the outset of the case to measure the type, range, and severity of presenting problems. So in other words, if there are no measures at all in the case report, then the mark should be reduced, possibly quite drastically. It might not necessarily fail overall, but actually it's going to have to be a good case report to bring it up to a pass, given that the guidance here is very clear. This is the layout of the assignment that we have suggested to the students. Chris, in their assignment workshop, went through this format, giving them lots of examples of what should go into each section. This is also based on the mark sheet, so the students are well advised to keep to this format. They don't have to, but if they didn't, it's going to make it a bit more difficult to mark. In the introduction, we're looking for a concise outline of the theory, research, or clinical literature relevant to the understanding of the problems and the intervention offered, and this needs to be referenced. And as with all introductions, we're also looking to orient the reader by setting out the main clinical conceptual issues which the report is concerned with and indicating the material to be covered, including some background information about the case. The next section is the presenting problem, and here we're looking for a summary of the problems presented and the associated goals. We want them to include the relevant history and the background information. It needs to be concise but sufficient to help the reader understand what's going on. They should include the diagnosis if that is relevant and the methods used to arrive at that diagnosis, but they do not need to list the diagnostic criteria in full. There should be some measures in there and some justification for why those measures were chosen. And we would also expect the scores to be interpreted, ideally in the light of other clinical material. The formulation must, of course, be coherent, psychologically sound, and based on developmental psychopathology. If you want to know what the students have been taught about developmental psychopathology, then check out their lectures on the Keats website. And if you want a very brief overview, Chris provided a brief primer on developmental psychopathology in the assignment workshop for this assignment. The slides for that are all available on Keats. And they may integrate a model-specific formulation within their overall developmental psychopathology formulation. In the handbooks, there is a specific statement about using diagrams and flowcharts. So if the student chooses not to, you probably would not fail the assignment just for that, but you may well choose to deduct some marks for this disregard of the handbook. And then we have a section on reporting the course of therapy. You don't need me to read through this bulleted list. The information that we would expect is listed quite clearly there. And similarly for outcome measures, we have a section specifically looking at the outcome measures as the therapy has progressed. And again, there's a very explicit statement here about the current view tool. So it says the current view tool should be used to help document the problems. And the current view tool was explained to them in a lecture at the beginning of the year and also basically celebrated in a recent lecture on comorbidity. So there's no excuse for them not knowing about it. And then finally, a section on discussion and reflection. And again, what we would expect to find in that section is listed here. And finally, the reference list. We have asked them specifically to use the guidance that we've given, which is based on APA formatting. And this is now their fourth piece of core skills coursework. They have a clear guidance on the referencing. They really should be getting the hang of it by now. And we would consider this to be an appropriate and important part of being a scientist practitioner. So we do see this as important, and we would expect them to lose marks if they're not referencing accurately and appropriately. Finally, if in doubt, the Core Skills Handbook has a lot of information, much of which has been in these previous slides. There is the video of the workshop that Chris provided for the students you could look at. And ultimately, feel free to get in touch with us. And if we're honest, the best way to do that is to email our administrator, Hope Bull, on hope.bull@annafreud.org, and she will know which one of the Core Skills team is most available and most helpful at that moment. So good luck, keep in touch, and let us know how we can help. Thanks very much.